So welcome to Arty Farty Metal. So today I'm going to be starting on a really difficult project, the claw. So you might think, oh well, most of it looks like it's already done, but that was the easy part that the fabricator did. He was able to fold up bits and pieces. Now the difficult part is going to be the center part. And as we go through this tutorial, I'll be explaining why. So what you need to remember that I used Blender to create my 3D model, and then I imported it into Pepakura. Now Blender is free software. Pepakura, you pay $80 for a lifetime use. Pepakura is really a Japanese folding program, paper folding program. But you can, this is what a lot of 3D metal makers use. So here we actually have a collection of crab claws. I was inspired by the crab claw I found at the beach. And this is actually the original, what's left of it. And it was a bit bigger than that. This is a scanned 3D image. And then this, as you can see, represents that. And then this one here is my stylized version that I made up in Blender, but I was never really very happy or confident about it. And considering the amount of money it would cost to make it, I decided that I would just go for this little top part of this. So here we have it. So here's a close-up of the claw. The two claws then come out from some fishing line. This is a small claw. Now we're going to duplicate the process with the large claw. And you can see coming up how I use Pepakura to create this. You can see the snapshot from the 3D model I made in Blender. You need to take this into Pepakura, which is a paper design program, and you can see the snapshots from Pepakura. Now, what I've done next is given it to the fabricator, because the fabricator can actually do a lot of folding. You don't need to cut all the pieces apart. The fabricator's done the folding. And the only part that really couldn't be folded together, because the bits were too small, was the front section there. So he had to cut all the little bits separately. And what I've done here, I've put the fold angle on one side and I've numbered them 1 through to 9. Now it's important we have the fold angle on the right side, otherwise you end up getting it upside down. So what we're looking at, number 2 is 134 and 147, and number 3 we'll be looking at folds 156 and 145. The one with the fold angle of 134, those two folds there, and I've got it on the left side as per the diagram. Now the other side, you'll see the fold angle is 147 is the fold angle, and I've got 147 on this side. Now if I had them around the other way, there'd be a few problems. So that's where the first one's going to go. Now obviously there's going to be a bit of mucking around here. So today I'm going to start with the number 1 piece. So in order to do this claw, I'm using some blue tack to put the number 1 piece in. Now as you can see on this side, there's already a problem because there's a big gap. So I'm going to have to cut out a bit of metal and weld that in there. So I'm not really sure what to do about this big gap. I'm probably going to put this piece of steel in there. So now I'm progressing to the second one, 134, 147. So as you can see, this has got a great big gap in it. I'm going to cut a bit of metal that size. I'm just guessing at the size, and then I'm going to weld it on. Well, as you can see, that's not a really good fit, but I'm going to do my best to weld it together. So I'm progressing to number 3 now, joining the folds of 156 and 145. So as you can see from this, it's very inexplicably not fitting together. I've cut out a bit of metal there, and I'm going to weld that on. So you can see here I put a couple of layers of weld, and this section down here I've cut out the piece of metal, and I'm going to put a few layers of weld there, and that's to sort of give it a more curved appearance. So I don't know if you can see that, but because I hadn't tacked that and a lot of heat has actually gone into here, it's starting to pull apart a bit. So I'm just going to go in and tack that again. I'm probably going to tack a few other places. So it looks pretty messy at the moment. Like I said, I'm building up the weld. I'm using actually a 3mm rod and sort of keep going over that. Now just be careful that these tacks don't come undone because of all the heat that's going into it. So now that I've ground a lot of that off, it obviously looks a lot better. I'm going to go back in now and say there, for example, looks like there's a bit of slag in there. I'm going to go back in with a 1.5mm rod and a very low voltage, because now that I've ground it off, I'm not really sure how thick it is, so I've got to be very careful I don't burn any holes in it. So as you can see, this has been progressing along. It's been extremely difficult because of the fact that the 3D cuts don't match up. I'm going to try and do here. You can just see that little area there. I'm going to actually use a drill, actually the side of the drill, to sort of see if I can get a bit of that slag out and redo it. Now, the problem is going to be that because I've been grinding, it means the metal's thinner than usual. So as I go and try to weld it, it might burn a hole in things. So what I've done, I've left it overnight so it's completely cooled down, and I'm going to use a very low voltage and see if I can fix it that way. Now I normally wouldn't use a drill to get the slag out, but I don't know, sometimes it actually works better than just a brush and hitting. You can see that it's out now. So at the moment it's a bit of a lumpy mess, but let's see what we can do when I grind it off. So trying to repair this, I ended up burning a big hole in it. What's handy to have around are some bits of metal to try and fill up something like that. So this bit of metal here looks like it might fit in. So the best thing is not to lose it. So what I've done, I put it in as close as possible. I might even hammer that down a bit more and try not to hammer it out. So I'm going to weld that bit now. Oh, I keep burning holes in this, so what I'm going to do is work on another part of the sculpture, and that will give this a bit of time to cool down. So what I'm hoping might help is if I turn it round a different way. What you need to remember is that gravity is your friend. The flatter that is, and the better it fits the hole, obviously the better this is going to work. And then what I'm going to do is take the welding rod going from about here and going upwards, up here. So you can see now it's actually been fixed, but with a lot of trouble. So sometimes it's not even worth fixing. In fact, If I look at it here, it sort of revealed another piece of slag. But I'm going to not be a perfectionist here. I'm going to keep moving on. I keep burning holes because the gaps are so large in here. A little box full of metal bits, and I'm going to just stick those in some of the gaps. So here's one example where I'm going to put a bit of metal in there. It's not a bad fit, it's not a good fit either. And then I'm going to weld that. So there's the next bit of metal, and I'm going to try and weld that across. That looks reasonably successful, but I'm just going to grind another, I'm going to weld another line next to that just to be sure. So I've got my second weld in, just underneath it there, and I'm going to grind that down and show you what it looks like. Okay, well I've ground that down, but what I've noticed is there's a little bit of a hole at the beginning. Somehow I missed that. So I'm just going to sort of hammer that. Oh, I don't really need to hammer it, maybe just brush it, and then I'll weld that. So I've just welded up that hole, and now I'm going to grind it down. So there we have it, that's a section that I just welded. Yeah, so I got it about 1 centimetre long, and then it just got, the gap was just too wide and I burned a hole. However, a bit further up, it's close enough together, I think, for me to be able to weld that. So you can see from here that this second gap is not too big. So we've got to the end of it really. What I'm doing now, I'm just checking all these welds. I can see that that one needs a bit of grinding off. I basically finished the second claw now. I've got it sitting there upside down because what I want to do is attach this piece of metal to the bottom, and then this piece of metal goes in here, and this is how we're going to form the base, because I want the claw to be coming out of the ground. So I've got to kind of cross here, and that's how it's going to fit in. What I've also got on the ends is 2 bits of rebar. Through these I'm going to be able to screw in a peg. So that's sort of another stabilizing feature. So one of the problems I'm having in trying to weld this onto the cross base is that this steel here is probably 5 mils, and this steel here, maybe it's only 2 mils. So what I've tried to do, unsuccessfully, I've managed on this side, is I'm just putting tack welds there first. So I'm going to put most of my heat into here, the thicker part, and my welding rod here, and then sort of dragging it down onto this bit. So I'm going to put 8 tack welds in, and then I'm going to put it at an angle that's easier for me to weld. So you can see now I've got my 2 tack welds in, and I've got it at a bit of a slant backwards. Just remember, gravity is your friend. Let's see if I can weld between the 2 tack welds. Well, you can see from this it's a bit of a mess, but I'm reluctant to try and grind it down and weld it back again, because every time I grind this 2mm, I'm going to make the chance of getting holes in it even higher. Plus this is all going underground, so I know it's going underground, so no one's going to see it anyway. Let me try the other 4 sides. So that smoky stuff you see coming up, you get that when galvanized steel has been welded. I should have really ground off where I was about to weld with the galvanized steel. That was another thing that was making the job a lot harder. So the next part of this, I'm going to have these, just a bit of rebar, 1 centimetre apart on the base, and then I'll be able to put a peg through that later. Okay, so we've now got our base made up. The blue part will actually go under the ground, and as I said before, this other blue piece will fit inside, like so. And this blue piece I'm now going to attach to the bottom of the claw. So putting this bit of square pipe onto our claw, I've tacked the 4 points. Obviously this one's not done very well, I'll just redo that. And then I'm going to start welding along each side. So the first base of the large claw is that one I'm pointing to there. And I'm going to make a smaller base for the second claw. You can see where the peg fits in. The peg fits in here and goes into the ground to add more stability to it. So what I'm actually doing here is using both the angle grinder with a sanding disc on it, and I'm also using the Arty mini grinder. And what I'm trying to do is just get off any slag, any splatter. So I'm using the mini grinder in these areas in here, which are really hard to get at. You can see the diameter of that disc compared to the diameter of the angle grinder disc. As well as using the grinder and looking for any splatter, I'm also feeling to see if I can feel any splatter here. So just one thing about doing these welds. So what you need to do is put a tack weld there, a tack weld there, a tack weld there, a tack weld there, and then flip it over to the other side. Now if you try to weld the whole thing, what will happen, it will bend inwards, and you'll have a hard time getting that bend out. I've also put some heavy weights there to try and keep it flat. And now I'll turn it over and do the other side. So you can see it's a bit of a messy outcome. These little white flakes you see here, that's because some of it's galvanized steel. Now it doesn't matter that it's so messy because this will be underground. So I'm on to putting the second bit of metal tubing on the base, and I'm using a stop-start welding process. I've tacked the ends and now I'll do the stop-start through as a line across here. So a hole can be a problem if water gets in there, and it starts to, if water gets in that hole, it'll start to rust away the metal. What I'm going to do is put a bit of metal in there. Now I'm going to try and hammer that in a bit. So I've welded it, ground it back, and I'm going to do another weld, and then the hole will be gone. So looking at that now, the hole's gone. Ta-da! So this is almost the final result. I'll be putting penetrol on both of them, and then I'll paint over them with some red enamel paint.